What if the walls of your home could remember? What if every laugh, every whisper, every secret was trapped in the bones of old buildings, waiting for the right frequency to play them back? This is the story of a man who accidentally discovered that the past isn't just history. It's still happening, on a wavelength we've only just begun to hear. In the sleek, minimalist kitchen of a renovated 1926 brownstone, Auden lived a life of quiet convenience. It was 2026, and his home was managed by Aura, the latest smart speaker that promised to understand not just commands but context, mood, the subtle rhythms of daily life. Auden had chosen this brownstone specifically for its bones: original brick, horsehair plaster, lead pipes that sang when the water ran. As a sound engineer, he appreciated the acoustic character of old buildings. They had texture, personality. Modern construction was too clean, too dead. But he had no idea just how alive this building really was. One morning, while Auden poured his coffee, Aura didn't play the weather. Instead, it emitted a sharp, static pop, like a record player finding its groove after decades of silence. Then came the sound of heavy velvet curtains closing, the crystal-clear clink of silverware against porcelain, the distant, muffled roar of a jazz band playing in the very room where he now stood, and a woman's melodic laugh. Auden froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. These weren't recordings from the internet. They were too textured, too physical. He could hear the acoustic space, the way sound bounced off walls that no longer existed in quite the same configuration. He could hear the humidity in the air, the weight of cigarette smoke dampening the high frequencies. As a sound engineer who had spent 15 years designing audio for films, he knew what real space sounded like versus artificial reverb. This was real. This was here. But it was also then. At first, he thought it was a malfunction, some weird radio interference. Maybe the device was picking up a vintage recording station, or someone nearby was playing a historical podcast. He checked the speaker's connection, rebooted it, even opened the app to see what it thought it was playing. The app showed it was currently playing the weather update for Phoenix, Arizona. But the speaker continued to broadcast the sounds of 1920. Auden was a man of logic and science. Sound waves, after all, were just physics, compressions and rarefactions traveling through matter. But what he was hearing defied everything he understood about temporal physics. He began to research obsessively, falling down rabbit holes of quantum mechanics, acoustic archaeology, and paranormal theories he would have laughed at a week ago. That's when he found it: architectural memory. It was a fringe theory, dismissed by mainstream science but whispered about in forums by acoustic researchers and building restoration specialists. The idea was simple but profound. Certain building materials, particularly those with crystalline structures like quartz and concrete, or the complex lattices in horsehair plaster and lead, could theoretically trap vibrations. Not just any vibrations, emotionally charged ones. Moments of high energy, parties, arguments, celebrations, crimes. The materials would act as an unintentional phonograph, storing the mechanical waves in their molecular structure. And under the right conditions, with the right receiver, those vibrations could be played back. Auden ran his fingers over the exposed brick in his kitchen, feeling the slight roughness, the century of paint and time. He thought about the lead pipes still running through the walls, the original horsehair plaster beneath the modern drywall in the dining room. This house was built in 1926. The sounds he was hearing were from 1920. Perhaps construction workers listening to jazz while they built these very walls, or the first owners, celebrating the completion of their new home. But why now? Why, after 100 years, was the house suddenly speaking? He decided to document everything. His living room transformed into a laboratory, a forest of tripods and parabolic microphones, spectrum analyzers, oscilloscopes, and recording equipment that made his normally minimalist space look like a mad scientist's lair. He called his project the Ghostly Timeline. For weeks, Auden mapped the phenomenon with scientific precision. He discovered patterns, schedules. The sounds didn't appear randomly, they followed a temporal logic. Every evening at exactly 8:14 p.m., the frequency stabilized. The same dinner party from 1920 would begin again, looping through Aura's digital veins. He could set his watch by it. He analyzed the waveforms, noting the specific frequencies involved. Interestingly, they clustered around 528 hertz, sometimes called the love frequency or miracle tone by sound healing practitioners. But Auden noted something else. 528 hertz was also close to the resonant frequency of human DNA and certain crystalline structures. The house wasn't just playing back sounds. It was resonating at a frequency that bridged matter and memory. On the 23rd night of his investigation, something changed. The audio shifted. The roar of the party faded, replaced by the intimate sound of heavy velvet curtains being drawn, footsteps on hardwood, the click of a door closing. Then, a woman's voice, the same melodic laugh he'd heard that first morning, but now urgent, hushed. "He knows about the ledger, Alistair," she whispered. "We have to hide it behind the molding in the study." Auden's blood ran cold. This wasn't ambient party noise. This was a private conversation, a secret. He was eavesdropping on a moment that was never meant to be overheard, not in 1920, and certainly not a century later. He pulled up the property records that night, cross-referencing the original owners. The house had been built for Genevieve and Alistair Montgomery in 1926, but the voices he was hearing predated the house. They had to be from their previous residence, or perhaps sounds that had somehow transferred during construction, materials from an older building incorporated into the new one. But what was the ledger? What had they hidden? Auden stood in his study, a room he used for mixing audio lined with acoustic foam. He looked at the original crown molding, untouched since the renovation. Behind there, somewhere, might be evidence of a 100-year-old secret. But something stopped him from tearing into the wall. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about discovery. There were ethical dimensions he hadn't considered. These people, Genevieve, Alistair, whoever else moved through these rooms, they had expected privacy. They had lived their lives never imagining that future technology would resurrect their most intimate moments. Was he a researcher, or was he colonizing their privacy across time itself? The term digital haunting took on new meaning. He wasn't the one being haunted, he was the ghost. The realization that changed everything came by accident, literally. One evening during the 8:14 p.m. window, Auden reached for his water glass and knocked it off the table. It shattered against the hardwood floor with a crash that seemed to pierce through time itself. The 1920 party sounds, which had been in full swing, suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Then, after a moment that felt like the universe holding its breath, the sounds resumed. But they were different. Muted, confused. He could hear worried murmurs, as if the party guests had heard something they couldn't explain. Beads of sweat appeared on his brow as he grabbed the nearest object, a book, and dropped it on the floor. Again, the 1920 sounds reacted. A woman gasped. Footsteps approached the source of the sound. In his time. In their time. The same physical location across a century of separation. The frequency, wasn't one way, it was a bridge. When Auden made sounds, the 1920 version of this house could hear them. The residents from 100 years ago were experiencing their own haunting. A mysterious presence that dropped things, made noises, violated the laws of their understood reality. Auden sat in total silence, the weight of this discovery crushing him. Every footstep he took, every word he spoke during those evening hours, they were heard by people who had been dead for decades. He began to question everything. What was consciousness? What was time? If vibrations could be stored and replayed, if the past and present could literally hear each other, what did that mean about the nature of existence itself? Was anything ever truly over? Or did everything that ever happened continue to happen, simultaneously, on different frequencies? He decided to stay silent during the evening windows. He would listen, but not interact. It was the ethical choice, or so he told himself. But he couldn't stop thinking about Genevieve. Her voice had become familiar to him. He knew her laugh, the rhythm of her speech, the slight catch in her throat when she talked about Alistair. He'd learned that she loved Billie Holiday, that she collected pressed flowers, that she worried about money, that she had dreams of traveling to Paris. He knew her more intimately than most people knew their neighbors, and he wanted to help her. In 1920, Genevieve paused mid-sentence during a dinner party. She felt it again, that strange chill in the air of her dining room, a pressure that shouldn't be there. She looked toward the corner of the room, the exact spot where, a century later, a sleek black cylinder would sit on a mahogany table. She didn't see the device, but she felt the weight of a gaze across time. "Are you there?" she asked herself, barely audible. Auden heard it. The question wasn't directed at anyone in 1920. It was directed at him. She knew. Somehow, Genevieve had become aware of the presence. She'd been feeling it for weeks. Footsteps when no one walked, the sound of breathing in empty rooms, the sensation of being observed. She began to speak to the empty air, directed at the spot where she felt the presence strongest. "Are you a demon?" she asked the silence. "Or are you simply what becomes of us?" In 2026, Auden heard her breath as if she were standing right beside him. The architectural memory wasn't just playing back sounds anymore. It was creating a live connection, a real-time conversation across 100 years. He wanted to answer her, to tell her he wasn't a demon, to explain what he was. But how could he? What words could bridge that impossible gap? Late that night, Auden sat in total silence. The speaker didn't play music or static. It played the sound of a match being struck in 1920. Then Genevieve's voice came through, no longer whispering to Alistair, but speaking with terrifying clarity directly to Auden, breaking the digital barrier that separated their realities. "I can hear you breathing, Auden." She said his name. "I've been waiting 100 years for you to answer." Auden's hand trembled, hovering over the speaker, caught between silence and speech, between the ethical weight of disrupting history and the human need to connect across the impossible divide. Some frequencies once discovered can never be unheard. Some connections once made can never be broken. The nature of time, consciousness, and memory remains one of humanity's greatest mysteries. Could the past and present exist simultaneously, separated only by frequency? Could buildings truly remember? What do you think? Have you ever felt a presence in an old building? Heard sounds that didn't belong to your time? In a universe where nothing is ever truly lost, every moment might be eternal, just waiting for the right frequency to bring it back.